The B-Corp movement essentially started with the intention to make business more good. In its essence, it's about, instead of looking at how can we optimize for value extraction from the economy, is how can we create more value for the planet as a whole and for society as a whole.
Welcome to the Sustainable Healthcare Podcast by us, Green Innovation Group. We are a strategy consultancy only working with sustainability in healthcare. So listen in for tools, tips and tricks on how to get your organization sustainable. And today, my good friend and CEO of Green Innovation Group, Frederik will give us an introduction into the B-Corp framework, a sustainability framework for organizations and also for pharma and medtech companies that they can use. And I think it's really good to just get a simple introduction into this, as I see a lot of people struggling with how to use different frameworks and are they compatible and so on. So listen in and don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn. Hi Frederik, welcome back to the Green Innovation Group Sustainability Healthcare Podcast.
Thank you, Joachim. It's a pleasure to be here.
It always is. You are not only the CEO in Green Innovation Group, you are also our resident B-Corp expert. And B-Corp is one of many sustainability frameworks that helps people get going and organizations get going on their sustainability efforts. And this episode we are going to take the one-on-one 101 on B-Corp. What is it? What is it good for? Is there some things not so good for? Because I think it's still a bit of a jungle out there for a lot of people with all the frameworks and which to pick and when and so on. So
yeah, and the funny thing about jungles is that they're very hard to find your way around in.
Exactly, just like the frameworks.
The metaphor works on so many levels.
So plain and simple, spoken to a 5-year-old, what is B-Corp?
First off, speaking about jungles, I heard this amazing case that they actually found an Inca city that was completely hidden to the human eye, so we haven't been able to see it from air photography ever. Then they made a sound echolocation radar or something, a LiDAR I think it's called, and they managed to echolocate an entire Inca city that was hidden inside the jungle. I had to share that.
We need a parallel podcast for good things that come up.
So now that you ask about the B-Corp framework, it's out of my mind now. I can relax. The B-Corp movement essentially started with the intention to make business more good, or to enable a business for good. That's kind of the core concept behind it. And in order to do that, they developed this framework that provides a measuring stick for companies to see how does our ambition match up with our performance on sustainability. So it's a very holistic framework, but it's also quite structured. So what I would say is if you're working in the healthcare industry one way or another, there's a way for you to derive value from the B-Corp assessment tool. So the certification is one thing in its own right. It can be praised or it can be criticized. That's not really why we're here. It's mostly to give a fly-in for what is the B-Corp movement and the certification all about. And in its essence, it's about, instead of looking at how can we optimize for value extraction from the economy, is how can we create more value for the planet as a whole and for society as a whole. So that's kind of the main sort of raison d'etre for the B-Corp system, is to enable business for good.
Is that B-Corp, is it driven by an NGO, or what's sort of the the organization behind?
I think we need to do another parallel industry. When we're done with the jungle track, we need to do on how does B-Corp operate and how is it managed track. But there's an organization that verifies all of the assessments and provides the certificate for companies that get B-Corp certified. That's a very long, I wouldn't say necessarily too cumbersome process, but it's very structured and comprehensive process that you need to go through. It's all run as a non-profit, and throughout the systems they have different geographical locations and offices. There are slight deviations to the model, so I won't get too deep into what works in France is not the same in Denmark, and it's not the same as in the States.
Fair. So let's say I'm a pharma company or a medtech company or someone else in the healthcare industry. What would be the potential value add for me to go through this structured process?
So let's pretend you're Joachim's Cure company, and Joachim's Cure company or JCC as you reference, JCC Limited has an ambition to do no harm, for instance, playing into the patriotic oath, Hippocratic oath, and you have this desire and ambition to become a sustainable company. Okay, that's great. And you feel it in Joachim's Cure company deeply. All of the employees also share that ambition. But they're struggling because they're really good at creating and providing and developing cures, but they're not really great at providing sustainable transformations. So what this B-Corp assessment tool can offer is essentially a structured process for Joachim's Cure company to go through a whole range of different assessment questions that will provide a baseline for Joachim's Cure company to know how are you doing in Joachim's Cure company. Where are you essentially at today, and also provide a structured roadmap for how can you get to an even better position. And that process is quite valuable because it's structured very straightforward, first of all. So the UX is great, and I think
that's a good place to start.
That's a great place to start, right? When you're done answering all of the questions, you're also provided with sort of suggestions or very clear sort of. It's not exactly a gap analysis, but you can basically just read the graph and make the analysis yourself and say, okay, if we address this and this issue, we can score more points, and then we can actually get above the desirable baseline.
So it turns your ambition of becoming a better, a more sustainable company into giving a baseline of where are we today and a roadmap for how to improve and get better. Which areas does this encompass?
As I said before, it's a very holistic framework. And I think to be fair towards the B-Corp movement, what they do absolutely best, in my never that humble opinion, is that they have a forcing function to get companies to change their articles of association towards being mission locked. So it essentially means that Joachim's Cure company will have to go to its articles of association and say, we're going to provide great cures without compromising the environment, the people, the planets. We can still be a for-profit, but we need to have it sort of mission locked into our articles of association.
And articles of association?
Meaning the official document that says what Joachim's Cure Company Limited has to do legally in the registry of the business authorities.
All right.
I hope that was some lawyer is going to give me a whooping now, but I think that was a fair enough summary. So there's 5 areas that we're looking at: environment, workers, customers, community, and company governance. So we're looking at the environment. That would be a classic environment, sort of what is the impact to the surrounding environment, how is our use of chemicals, how is our CO2 emission or CO2 equivalent emission performance. how's our water treatment, how is our waste disposal structured, and all of the things you would traditionally associate with environment.
All the things we work with in Green Innovation Group.
Yes, and also more. I mean, it has surprised me the deeper I've dived into this framework, how much it actually covers, and how complementary it is. But then that environment is, to me, the most interesting area. Then we also have the employee or the worker category, and that's how well are the employees in Joachim's Cure company actually doing. So do you have a way to ensure that there's paid maternity and paternity leave? How is the distribution between the lowest paid worker and the highest paid worker? Well, what is the difference between the highest and the lowest? By what factor are they different? It's okay, they're different. They're going to be different for many cases, but how are they different? Then it's about so that's the workers. There's a lot, of course, of the social agenda there. How many people with disabilities? Do you filter for biases in your recruitment, etc.? Then we have the corporate governance. This is where you have the articles of association question. It's also how is the formation of the company? Do you have employee stock options? Do you have employee influence? Is there a board representative from the employees? And many other interesting questions. Then we have the customers. What's going on with the customers? How are they influenced by the decisions that you make in Joachim's Cure company? And how are you also collaborating with them to create a more sustainable world? The last we have is the community. So what does Joachim's Cure company do for the surrounding community? And the most sort of straightforward approach to it is, mind you, this is an American framework, so a lot of it is fit for an American context. That's simply, do you engage in community work? How much does an employee in Joachim's Cure company get to engage in community work? Do you go and wipe the streets with your broomsticks, or do you go and provide free treatment for the ill-disposed, or what do you do in the sort of community service realm as the last one? And of course, this also goes to one of the sort of pitfalls in the framework, is that it doesn't really distinguish that well between whether or not Joachim's Cure company is incorporated in Denmark with a relatively strong welfare state, where Joachim's Cure company pays taxes in Denmark and its employees pays taxes in Denmark. So a lot of capital is actually directed into a welfare system, whereas in other countries it's not. But right now they compare more or less one-to-one. And
so by spending the same amount of money in the community through taxes, I would get a low score or no points, but by donating an equivalent amount in a US context, for instance, I would score highly. We incorporated in Cayman Island, by the way. Yeah. We're all about that profit. And
but it's a good place to run a cure company. So that's those are the 5 categories, and they have each a number of questions. I think around 40 on average.
Are they more or less equally in terms of their proportion of the score?
No, not at all. They are weighted, and the framework is updated every 3 years. So as we know, the impact space is a space that changes quite rapidly. So in order to stay relevant and also stay ambitious, they review the assessment every 3 years. And in the last, most recent edition, they went from the 5th to the 6th. They changed 48% of all of the questions. So that's a pretty radical makeover, you could say, even if it's just minor changes, but it just reflects that, okay, things that were relevant 3 years ago have become mainstream. Well, then we need to raise the bar. And what I've been most impressed with in the framework, besides sort of the comprehensiveness, is how complementary it is with other frameworks.
Interesting.
So everything you have, Joachim's Cure Company has of course complied with the ISO standard 9000 and 14001 for your quality management systems and your environmental management systems. But that also means that you're already going through a lot of the processes that would give you sort of a high score in the assessment, because you did that to obtain the ISO standard certificate. You also spend a lot of time deciding on pretty colors from the SDG framework, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And luckily, I knew you were going to ask, because Joachim's Cure Company cares about this. There's also complementary here, so complementarity. So you can actually see how does each of these assessment areas influence into not just a specific SDG with a number, but also with its sub-target, which has been one of my main points of critique on the SDG carousel, is that you just...
the sub-targets are way stronger than and those that are actually meaningful.
Organizations tend to pick a few numbers that look pretty and then say nothing more. So it's complementary with the net zero agenda, with the greenhouse gas accounting protocol, with the science-based targets initiative, with the global reporting, the GRI system, and with basically with most of the major recognized frameworks. There's a very high degree of compatibility and complementarity.
So if you had to sum it up, 1 or 2 sentences, what is B-Corp?
It helps companies turn ambitions and desires for sustainability into a structured process with a baseline and a roadmap for improvement.
What is it good at?
It's good at showing the world that you're doing the work.
Yeah.
So you're not necessarily done, but you have gone through the processes, you have reviewed everything, you've checked yourself, and you are continuously checking yourself. It's a lot of work, so you can't do this with your left hand.
And on a high level, not talking into the specific sub-points, what are some of the potential pitfalls or weaknesses?
Of course, that an assessment will never be stronger than the processes that are generating the documentation provided. So, the classic case of food preservation, when Victoria Lake is fished for fish, they take the fish in the hole, they put it on ice, they store it and conserve it on ice, they ship it to the harbor town, stored on ice, because the documentation says so. And that's a paper form where there's a checkbox: is it stored on ice? Yes, no. And checking that box does not mean that the fish has been stored on ice. And I think that's actually applicable to everything here. That the framework is only as strong as the process that's actually generating the documentation. And it can be make-believe to a very high degree. And we don't really have a good way of sort of quadruple checking that.
No. And then there's of course always the good old question that we often return to, that when a customer buys something from you, does the world become a better place?
Yes.
To sort of make sure that frameworks like this is integrated into the core business and not just in a harm reduction.
And funnily enough, if you can answer that, there's they have the concept of impact business models. And if every time a customer buys something, it's making something a little bit better, well, then you will actually score higher. Whereas if it's making something slightly less bad, then you're losing out on a lot of potential points.
Thank you so much, Frederik, for coming in and telling us and our listeners, giving a brief intro to B-Corp.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to the jungle episode.
Oh yeah. We need a parallel basement podcast.
Yeah, it's happening. It's happening.
Definitely.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Hi, Joachim back here. Always a joy to speak with Frederik. Key takeaway from this episode for me was that B-Corp can provide a really structured way of how to go from having a sustainability ambition to actually know where are you today and what you need to get where you want to go. There are of course many other frameworks that can also do this, but B-Corp is one good place to start. So if you're interested in working with B-Corp, feel very free to reach out to us at greeninnovationgroup.com or find either me or Frederik on LinkedIn.